New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo was sworn in for a third term on Tuesday in a ceremony on Ellis Island. Here now to discuss Cuomo's inauguration speech and more is Michael Benjamin, Associate Editorial Page Editor of the New York Post. And first and foremost, Happy New Year, Mike.
Happy New Year to you too, Daren.
Hey, listen, talking about it, the governor sworn in for a third term, and your thoughts on the governor's speech?
I thought it was it did two things. It sort of created conflict between himself and President Trump. I think it signaled to New Yorkers that Governor Cuomo is looking towards possibly running for president in 2020. And he's looking forward to trying to put forward a progressive agenda in New York State, working with his Democratic colleagues in the state Senate and the state Assembly. But he wants to keep his hand firmly on the wheel of government.
And when we talk about, a possible presidential run, some people said that speech actually sounded somewhat presidential. Here we've been talking all day about the minimum wage rising to $15 an hour. We know that was put in effect before, but given the fact it hits now, how good is that a feather in the cap for the governor on the part of New Yorkers?
Yeah, it's a good feather for him because it goes along with those progressives who've been pushing for a living wage. And $15 per hour is considered a living wage, and it's a start towards a possibly higher one. And I know in upstate New York it's being phased in. It's not exactly $15 an hour, but it's being phased in. So the governor has that where he's looking after the working class New Yorkers, folks who starting out who need the extra money to take care of themselves and their families. So he has that as a feather in his cap to start off this whole new year as he pushes forward for a new progressive agenda in New York State. And then, again, like I said, I sincerely believe he has his eye on running in 2020.
Right. The legalization of marijuana, of course, something the governor has talked about, making recreational use legal, but then also dealing with those who have been criminalized in this process with the Democratic State Assembly and the Democratic Senate. Do we see this happening quickly?
Quickly, well, from our perspective at the New York Post editorial board, we'd like to see it at least done with some level of care and measure, because one, you still have the issues of if it's legalized, we don't want to see any rise in the number of auto accidents, impaired driving as a result. Police have no real way of measuring one's influence under marijuana. And in states where it's been legalized, they've seen increases in impaired driving. And so we want to go slow. We don't think it should be done willy-nilly. We don't think it should be done as part of the budget. We think there ought to be hearings, there ought to be testimony from health experts, law enforcement, and others to determine how best to do it. And we'd also like to see, yes, it's persons who have had their lives somewhat impacted by being street sellers of marijuana and they're nonviolent criminals. Yes, they should have some way of having that removed from their record so they can try to live a good life. And those who want to seek licenses for selling recreational pot, that should be a thought-out process. It shouldn't be considered some sort of reparation, but there should be a much more thought-out process.
Yeah, I want to go to also talking about the state, the Assembly, as well as the Senate. Given the fact that Democrats have both the Senate and the Assembly, what do we see tackling first amongst both branches of government, and what can we see in quick action?
Well, I see them going after the low-hanging fruit that they've been looking at for a number of years. The Republican Senate has blocked, such as codifying Roe v. Wade, taking abortion out of the criminal statute, and legalizing it that way, and taking away criminal penalties for abortion. I see them passing in both houses the gender bill for persons who are transgender and creating additional rights for them. The Assembly has passed it in a number of years. The Senate has not. So I see them going after those easy, low-hanging things early on, and then the harder things probably will be tackled during the budget. Then hopefully other things will be drawn out over the course of the session through June and into next year as well. I don't think they should front load all the big stuff now. We do not see single payer health care in New York State happening this year. That's not going to happen. The governor said it's expensive. We don't see him. I don't see him agreeing to do it with his colleagues in the legislature.
Do we see healthcare? I mean, not healthcare reform. Pardon me, criminal justice reform. I know that's something that's going to be tackled and talked about right off the bat. A lot
I
of
think
people.
the governor's talking about cash bail reform. I think that'll probably happen when, I'm not sure, but I see momentum for that happening in both houses, and I think the governor is disposed to doing that. I think around marijuana legalization, they'll probably look at some way of dealing with persons who have criminal records that involves marijuana, pot selling. I see some of that maybe being dealt with, but I don't see it being front loaded before the April 1st budget. Maybe taking place over the course of April through the end of session in June.
Talk to me about voter reform, because I know that's something that was met about shortly after the elections. New York State caucus to deal with some of the election reform, possibly the right of early voting, things like that. These are things that we talked about that would be tackled. But do we see this coming, full circle and a vote on this in the near future?
I believe so. Again, the governor signaled his interest in early voting. He talked about same-day registration as being something he could be supportive of. And my former colleagues in the assembly have passed these bills year after year, only to have the state senate block it. So with their colleagues, Democratic colleagues in charge of the state senate, we can see those things happening as well. I can't predict when it's going to happen. They might want to try to get some things done for like in New York City, where we're having a 2019 election for public advocate. We have, I think, the DA's races in the Bronx and Queens. Roll it out slowly to see what it looks like in sort of off-year elections. So some aspect of it I could see being done, voted on and passed this year.
Give me a quick synopsis as to what we can see coming up in 2019 from your perspective. I mean, you're from the Post. I mean, you guys have got your eyes and boots on the ground. What can we see that you guys will be tackling and looking forward to over the first quarter?
Issues that the editorial board will be looking at, or issues that legislature will be handling?
Yeah, that you guys will be taking a look at too as well.
Oh yeah, of course. We are a very fiscally conservative newspaper editorial board, and so we want to see how the governor came to office in 2011 as a fiscal conservative, trying to hold the line on ever expanding budgets and on trying to keep property taxes low in those communities where they're rather high. We want to see him continue to do that. Where we were hoping that he'll stay the fiscal conservative when it comes to issues like single-payer health care, which could be highly expensive. We were pleased that end of the year he did veto the extended 12-week family leave, which would have been very impactful and costly to both employers and employees. I think he pointed out there were some technical flaws that maybe his office and the legislature will look at this year to try to correct and minimize. We want the governor to do things that are good, that can be sensible and that don't get pushed quickly, like marijuana legalization. We want recreational legalization. We want to see that drawn out and having hearings and properly implemented, and not just done because it's something because they have a majority. Because you have the law of unintended consequences.
All right, Mike Benjamin, our guest here, associate editorial page editor of the New York Post. Thanks, Mike, for joining us, and once again, Happy New Year, brother.
Happy New Year to you and your family and all your viewers.
Hey, thanks a lot. All right, we're taking a quick break. We've got more Opus. Stay with us. We'll come right back right after this.